Part 7 of Childe Christopher and Goldilind the Fair by William Morris. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 25. Now they all come to the Tofts. Next morning, while the day was yet young, they rode together, all of them, the nighest way to the Tofts, for they knew the wood right well. Again they slept one night under the bare heavens, and, rising betimes on the morrow, came out under the Tofts some 4 hours after high noon, on as fair and calm a day of early summer as ever was seen. They rode straight up to the door of the great hall, and found but few folk about, and these mostly women and children. Jack was ridden abroad, they said, but they looked to see him back to supper, him and his sons, for he was no great way gone. Meantime, when they got off their horses, the women and children thronged round about them, and the children especially about Christopher, whom they loved much. The maidens also would not have him pass into the hall unkissed, though presently, after their faces had felt his lips, they fell a-staring and wondering at Goldilind, and when Christopher took her by the hand and gave her welcome to the house of the Tofts, and they saw that she was his, they grew to be somewhat afraid, or it might be shy, both of her and of him. Anyhow, folk came up to them in the hall and made much of them, and took them unto chambers and washed their feet, and crowned them with flowers, and brought them into the hall again, and up unto the dais, and gave them to eat and drink. Thither came to them also the Lady Margaret, Jack's wedded wife, and made them the most cheer that she might, and unto her did Christopher tell his story, as unto his very mother, and what there was in the house, both of carle and queen, gathered round about to hearken, and Christopher nothing loath. And Goldilind's heart warmed toward that folk, and in sooth they were a goodly people to look on, and frank and happy, and of good will, and could well of courtesy, though it were not of the courts. Wore the bright day, and it drew toward sunset, and now the carles came straight into the hall by 2s and 3s, till there were a many within its walls. But to each one of these knots as they entered, some one, carle or queen, spake a word or two, and straightway the newcomers went up to the dais and greeted Christopher pleasantly, and made obeisance to Goldilind. At last was the hall, so quiet erst, grown busy as a beehive, and amidst the throng thereof came in the serving folk, women and men, and set endlong boards up, for the high table was a standing one of oak, bright thick and strong. And then they fell to bringing in the service, all but what the fire was dealing with in the kitchen, and whilst this was a-doing the sun was sinking fast, and it was dusk in the hall by then it was done, though without the sky was fair and golden. And about the edges of the thicket were the nightingales singing loud and sweet, but within was the turmoil of many voices, whereof few heeded if their words were loud or soft. Amidst all this, from close to the hall, rang out the sound of many horns winding a woodland tune. None was afeared or astonished, because all knew it for the horns of Jack of the Tofts, but they stilled their chattering talk somewhat, and abided his coming, and even therewith came the sound of many feet and the clash of weapons, and men poured in, and there was the gleam of steel, as folk fell back to the right and left, and gave room to the newcomers. Then a loud, clear, and cheery voice cried out from amidst of them, "Light in the hall, men and maids! Candles, candles! Let's see who is here before us!" Straightway then was there running hither and thither, and light sprang up over all the hall, and there could folk see of Jack of the Tofts, and 1.5 of his best, every man of them armed with shield and helm and byrnie, with green coats over their armour, and wreaths of young oak about their basnets. There they stood amidst of the hall, and every man with his naked sword in his fist. Jack stood before his folk, clad in likewise with them, save that his head was bare but for an oak wreath. Men looked on a while and said naught, while Jack looked proudly and keenly over the hall, and at last his eye caught Christopher's, but he made the youngling no semblance of greeting. Christopher's heart fell, and he misdoubted if something were not wrong, but he spake softly to one who stood by him, and said, "Is aught amiss, Will Ashcroft? This is not the wont here." Said the other, "Not in my time, but for the last 7 days it hath been the wont, and then off weapons, and to supper peaceably." Chapter 26. Of the King of Oakenrealm. Even therewith, and while the last word had but come to Christopher's ears, rang out the voice of Jack of the Toffs again, louder and clearer than before. And he said, "Men in this hall, I bear you tidings. The King of Oakenrealm is amongst us to-night." Then, forsooth, was the noise and the turmoil, and cries and shouts and clatter, and fists raised in air and weapons caught down from the wall, and the glitter of spear-points and gleam of fallow blades. For the name of Rolf, King of Oakenrealm, was to those woodmen as the name of the great devil of hell, so much was he their unfriend and their dastard. But Jack raised up his hand and cried, "Silence ye! Blow up horns! The hunt's up!" Blared out the horns then, strong and fierce under the hall roof, and when they were done, there was more silence in the hall than summer night without. Only the voice of the swords could not be utterly still, but yet tinkled and rang as hard came against hard here and there in the hush. Again spake Jack, "Let no man speak, let no man move from his place. I see the King, ye shall see him." Therewith he strode up the hall and onto the dais, and came up to where stood Christopher holding Goldilind's hand, and she all pale and trembling. But Jack took him by the shoulder and turned him about toward a seat which stood before the board, so that all men in the hall could see it. Then he set him down in it, and took his sword from his girdle, and knelt down before the young man, and took his right hand, and said in a loud voice, "I, Jack of the Toffs, a free man and a sackless, wrongfully begilted, am the man of King Christopher of Oakenrealm, to live and die for him as need may be. Lo, Lord, my father's blade, wilt thou be good to me and gird me therewith as thy father girt him?" Now when Christopher heard him, at first he deemed that all this was some sport or play done for his pastime and the pleasure of the hall folk, in all kindness and honour. But when he looked in the eyes of him and saw him fierce and eager and true, he knew well it was no jest. And as the shouts of men went up from the hall and beat against the roof, himseemed that he remembered, as in a dream, folk talking anigh him when he was too little to understand, of a king and his son, and a mighty man turned thief and betrayer. Then his brow cleared and his eyes shone bright, and he leaned forward to Jack and girt him with the sword, and kissed his mouth and said, "Thou art indeed my man and my thane and my earl, and I gird thee with thy sword as my father girded thy father." Then stood up Jack of the Toffs and said, "Men in this hall, happy is the hour and happy are ye. This man is the King of Oakenrealm, and he yonder is but a thief of kings, a dastard." And again great was the shouting, for carle and queen, young and old, they loved Christopher well, and Jack of the Toffs was not only their warduke and alderman, but their wise man also, and none had any thought of gainsaying him. But he spake again and said, "Is there here any old man, or not so old, who hath of past days seen our king that was, King Christopher to wit, who fell in battle on our behalf? If so there be, let him come up hither." Then arose a greybeard from a bench nigh the high table, and came up unto the dais. A very tall man had he been, but was now somewhat bowed by age. He now leant before Christopher, and took his hand, and said, "I, William of Wittenham, a free man, a knight, sackless of the guilt which is laid on me, would be thy man, O my lord king, to serve thee in all wise. If so be that I may live to strike one stroke for my master's son, whom now I see, the very living image of the king whom I served in my youth." Then Christopher bent down to him and kissed him, and said, "Thou art indeed my man, and my thane, and my baron, and who knows but that thou mayest have many a stroke to strike for me in the days that are nigh at hand?" And again the people shouted, And then there came another and another, and 10 more squires and knights and men of estate, who were now indeed woodmen and wolf-heads, but who, the worst of them, were sackless of aught save slaying an unfriend, or a friend's unfriend, in fair fight. And all these kneeled before him, and put their hands in his, and gave themselves unto him. When this was done, there came thrusting through the throng of the hall a tall woman, old, yet comely as for her age. She went right up onto the dais, and came to where sat Christopher, and without more ado cast her arms about him, and kissed him, and then she held him by the shoulders, and cried out, "Oh, have I found thee at last, my loveling, and my dear, and my nurse chick, and thou grown so lovely, and yet so big, that I may never more hold thee aloft in mine arms as once I was wont. Though high enough belike thou shalt be lifted, and I say praise be to God and his hallows, that thou art grown so beauteous and mighty a man." Therewith she turned about toward the hall throng, and said, "Thou, Duke of these woodmen, and all ye in this hall, I have been brought hither by one of you, and though I have well nigh died of joy because of the suddenness of this meeting, yet I thank him therefore. For who is this goodly and gracious young man, save the king's son of Oakenrealm, Christopher that was, and that to my certain knowledge, for he is my fosterling and my milk-child. And I took him from the hands of the midwife in the high house of Oakenham at 21 years ago, and they took him from Oakenham, and me with him, to the house of Lord Richard the Lean at Longholmes. And there we dwelt, but in a little while they took him away from Longholmes, to I know not whither, but would not suffer me to go along with him, and ever sithence have I been wandering about and hoping to see this lovely child again. And now I see him, what he is, and again I thank God and all hallows therefore." Once more then was there stir and glad tumult in the hall, but Goldilind stood wondering, and fear entered into her soul, for she saw before her a time of turmoil and unpeace, and there seemed too much between her and the sweetness of her love. Withal it must be said that for as little as she knew of courts and war-hosts, she yet seemed to see lands without that hall, and hosts marching, and mighty walls glittering with spears, and the banners of a great king displayed. And Jack of the Toffs and his champions and good fellows seemed but a frail defence against all that, when once the hidden should be shown, and the scantiness of the woodland should cry on the abundance of the kingdom to bow down. Now she came round the board and stood beside Christopher, and he turned to her, and stood up and took her hand in such wise that she felt the caress of it, and joy filled her soul, as if she had been alone with him in the wildwood. But he spake and said, "All ye my friends, I see and wot well that ye would have me sit in my father's seat and be the king of Oakenrealm, and that ye will give me help and furtherance therein to the utmost. Nor will I cast back the gift upon you, and I will say this, that when I am king indeed, it is my meaning and my will now, that then I shall be no less one of you good fellows and kind friends than ye have known me hitherto, and even so I deem that ye think of me. But, good friends, it is not to be hidden that the road ye would have me wend with you is like to be rough, and it may well be that we shall not come to be kings or kings' friends, but men hunted, and often, maybe, men taken and slain. Therefore, till one thing or the other come, the kingship or the taking, I will try to be no less joyous than now I am, and so meseemeth shall ye. And if ye be of this mind, then shall the coming days be no worse than the days which have been, and God wot they have been happy enough. Now again ye see this most fair lady whose hand I hold. She is my beloved and my wife, and therewithal she is the true Queen of Medem, and a traitor sits in her place, even as a traitor sits in mine. But I must tell you that when she took me for her beloved, she knew not, nor did I, that I was a king's son, but she took me as a woodman and an outcast, and as a woodman and outcast I wooed her, trusting in the might that was in my body, and the love that was in my heart. And now before all you, my friends, I thank her and worship her that my body and my love was enough for her, as, God wot, the kingship of the whole earth should not be overmuch for her, if it lay open to her to take. But, sweet friends, Here am I talking of myself as a king wedded unto a queen, whereas meseemeth the chiefest gift our twin kingship hath brought you to-night is the gift of two most mighty unfriends for you, to wit, her foeman and mine. See ye to it then, if the wildwood yonder is not a meeter dwelling for us than this your goodly hall, and fear not to put us to the door as a pair of make-baits and a peril to this goodly company. Lo you, the sky without has not yet lost all memory of the sun, and in a little while it will be yellowing again to the dawn. Naught evil shall be the wildwood for our summer dwelling, and what, ere the winter come, we may have won us another house where erst my fathers feasted, and thereto, my friends, do I bid you all. But when they heard his friendly words and saw the beauty of the fair woman whose hand he held, his face grew so well beloved to them that they cried out with so great a voice of cheer, wordless for their very joy, that the timbers of the hall quavered because of it, and it went out into the wildwood as though it had been the feastful roaring of the ancient gods of the forest. But when the tumult sank a little, then cried out Jack of the Toffs, "Bring now the mickle shield, and let us look upon our king." So men went and fetched in a huge ancient shield, plated with berry-brown iron, inlaid with gold, and the four biggest men in the hall took it on their shoulders and knelt down anigh the dais, before Christopher. And Jack said aloud, "King, king, stand up here, for this war-board of old days is the castle, and the burg alone due to thee, and these four fellows here are the due mountains to upbear it." Then lightly strode Childe Christopher onto the shield, and when he stood firm thereon, they rose heedfully underneath him, till they were standing upright on their feet, and the king stood on the shield as if he were grown there, and waved his naked sword to the four orts. Then cried out an old woman in a shrill voice, "Lo, how the hills rise up into tall mountains! Even so shall I rise Childe Christopher to the kingship." Thereat all the folk laughed for joy and cried out, "Childe Christopher, Childe Christopher, our king!" And for that word, when he came to the crown indeed, and ruled wide lands, was he called Childe Christopher. And that name clave to him after he was dead, and but a name in the tale of his kindred. Now the king spake and said, "Friends, now it is time to get to the board and the feast which hath been stayed this while. And I pray you let it be as merry as if there were no striving and unpeaced betwixt us and the winning of peace. But to-morrow we will hallow in the moat, and my earls and my barons and good men shall give counsel, and then shall it be that the hand shall do what the heart biddeth." Therewith he leapt down from the shield, and went about the hall, talking to this one and that, till the board was full dight. Then he took his place in the high seat beside Jack of the Toffs, and David and Gilbert and his other foster brethren sat on either side of him, and their wives with them, and men fell to feasting in great glee. But one thing there is yet to tell of this feast. When men had drunk a cup or two, and drunk memories to good men dead, and healths to good men living, amidst this arose a grey-haired carle from the lower end of the hall, and said, "Childe Christopher, thy grace, that I may crave a boon of thee on this day of leal service." "Ask then," said Christopher with a pleasant face. "King," quoth the carle, "here are we all gathered together, and we have before us the most beautifullest woman of the world, who sitteth by thy side. Now to-night we be all dear friends, and there is no lack between us. Yet who can say how often we may meet, and things be so? I do not say that there shall enmity and dissension arise between us, though that may betide. But it is not unlike that another time thou, king, and thy mate may be prouder than now ye be, since now ye are new to it. And if that distance grow between us, it will avail naught to ask my boon then." "Well, well, ask it now, friend," said the king, laughing. "I were fain of ending the day with a gift." "This is it then, king," said the carle. "Since we are here set down before the loveliest woman in the world, grant us this, that all we menfolk may for this once kiss the face of her, if she will have it so." Huge laughter and cheers arose at his word, but King Christopher arose and said, Friend, thy boon is granted with a good will. Or how sayest thou, Goldilind, my beloved? For all answer she stood up, blushing like a rose, and held out her 2 hands to the men in the hall, and straightway the old carle rose up and went in haste to the high table, before another man might stir, and took Goldilind by the chin and kissed her well favouredly, and again men laughed joyously. Then came before her Jack of the Toffs and all his sons, one after other, and kissed her face, save only David, who knelt humbly before her, and took her right hand and kissed it, while the tears were in his eyes. Then came many of the men in the hall, and some were bold, but many were shy, and when they came before her, durst kiss neither hand nor face of her, but their hearts were full of her when they went to their places again, and all the assembly was praising her. So wore the time of that first night of the kingship of Childe Christopher. Chapter 27. Of the husting of the Tofts. When morning was, there were horns sounding from the tower on the Toft, and all men hastening in their war gear to the topmost of the other Toft, the bare one, whereon was no building, for thereon was ever the moat-stead of these woodmen. But men came not only from the stead and houses of the Tofts, but also from the woodland cots and dwellings anigh, of which were no few. And they that came there first found King Christopher sitting on the mound amid the moat-stead, and Jack of the Tofts and his 7 sons sitting by him, and all they well weaponed, and with green coats over their hauberks. And they that came last found 300 of good men and true gathered there, albeit this was but the hustings of the Tofts. So when there were no more to come, then was the moat hallowed and the talk began, but short and sharp was their rede, for well did all men wot, who had been in the hall the night before, that there was now no time to lose. For though nigh all the men that had been in the hall were well known to each other, yet might there perchance have been some spy unknown, who had edged him in as a guest to one of the good men. Withal, as the saw saith, the word flieth, the wight dieth, and it were well if they might gather a little host ere their foemen might gather a mickle. First therefore arose Jack of the Toffs, and began shortly to put forth the sooth that there was come the son of King Christopher the Old, and that now he was seeking to his kingdom, not for lust of power and gain, but that he might be the friend of good men and true, and uphold them and be by them upholden. And saith he, Look ye on the face of this man, and tell me where ye shall find a friend friendlier than he, and more single-hearted. And therewith he laid his hand on Christopher's head, and the young man rose up, blushing like a maid, and thereafter a long time could no laud be heard for the tumult of gladness and the clashing of weapons. But when it was a little hushed, then spake Jack again, Now, need no man say more to man on this matter, for ye call this curly-headed lad the King of Oakenrealm, even as some of ye did last night. Mighty was the shout of yea-say that arose at that word, and when it was stilled, a grey head stood up and said, King Christopher, and thou our leader, whom we shall henceforth call Earl, it is now meet that we shear up the war-arrow, and send it forth to whithersoever we deem our friends dwell, and that this be done at once here in this moat, and that the hosting be after 3 nights' frist in the plain of Hazeldale, which all ye know is 12 miles nigher to Oakenrealm than this. All men yea-said this, no one gainsaid it, and straightway was fire kindled and the bull slain, for the said elder had brought him thither, and the arrow was sheared and scorched and reddened, and the runners were fetched, and the word given them, and they were sped on their errand. Up rose then another, a young man, and spake, Many stout fellows be here, and some wise and well ruled, and many also hot-head and wilful. Childe Christopher is king now, and we all know him that when he cometh into the fray he is like to strike 3 strokes for 2 that any other winneth. But as to his lore of captainship, if he hath any, he was born with it, as is like enough, seeing who is his father. Therefore we need a captain well proven, to bid us how to turn hither and thither, and where to gather thickest and where to spread thinnest, and when to fall on fiercely, and when to give way, and let the thicket cover us. For wise in war shall our foemen be. Now, therefore, if anyone needeth a better captain than our kin-father and war-father, Jack of the Toffs, he must needs go fetch him from otherwhere. How sayest thou, Christopher lad?" Great cheer there was at the word, and laughter no little therewith. But Christopher stood up, and took Jack by the hand, and said, "Now say I, that if none else follow this man into battle, yet will I. And if none else obey him to go backward or forward, to the right hand or to the left, as he biddeth, yet will I. Thou, Wilfrid Wellhead, look to it that thou dost no less. But ye folk, what will ye herein?" So they all yea said Jack of the Toffs for captain, and forsooth they might do no less, for he was wary and wise, and had done many deeds, and seen no little of warfare. Then again arose a man of some 40 winters, strong built and not ungoodly, but not merry of countenance. And he spake, "King and war leader, I have a word to say. We be wending to battle, we carles, with spear in fist and sword by side, and if we die in the fray, of the day's work is it. But what do we with our kinswomen, as mothers and daughters and wives and she-friends, and the little ones they have borne us? For, see ye, this warfare we are faring, maybe it shall not last long, and yet maybe it shall, and then may the foemen go about us and fall on this stead if we leave them behind here with none to guard them. And if, on the other hand, we leave them men enough for their warding, then we minish our host overmuch. What do we then?" Then spake Jack of the Toffs, "This is well thought of by Howard of Whiteacre, and we must look to it. And by my rede we shall have our women and little ones with us, and why not? But we shall then but be moving Toftstead as we move, and ever to some of us hath it been as a camp rather than an house. Moreover, ye know it, that our women be no useless and soft queens, who durst not lie under the oak boughs for a night or two, or wade a water over their ankles, but valiant they be, and kind and helpful, and many of them are there who can draw a bow with the best, and it may be, push a spear if need were. How say ye, lads?" Now this also they yea said gladly. Forsooth they had scarce been fain of leaving the women behind, at least the younger ones, even had they been safe at the Toffs, for there is no time when a man would gladlier have a fair woman in his arms than when battle and life peril are toward. Thereafter the motes sundered, when the captain had bidden his men this and that matter that each should look to, and said that he, for his part, with King Christopher and a chosen band, would set off for Hazeldale on the to-morrow morn, whereas some deal of the gathering would of a certainty be come thither by then, and that there was enough left of that day to see to matters at the Toffs. So all men went about their business, which was, for the most part, seeing to the victualling of the host. End of Part 7.